Hello, and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage, a series of conversations, podcasts, maybe videos, maybe not videos, depending on where you're watching it, where myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, talks to my good friend, Mike Hutchinson, also games designer and developer, about designing better miniatures games. So, interestingly, well, possibly interestingly, the
Make it
last
interesting.
yeah,
Go on.
that's yeah.
Broadcasts.
It will be interesting. The last two things
Fascinatingly.
the last two things both of us have done, or like I guess the thing I'm in the process of doing, depending on where doing lies in your timeline, are games that didn't have miniatures removal. They
Yeah.
are combat games, games where people are getting shot at the very least, but no miniatures ever get taken off. So in Mike's case, Space Gits has uh, space orcs shooting each other in the face with machine guns and running each other over with cars, but nobody ever dies. And I've got boards and black flags where, to be fair, models get like removed for a round or like actually a bit of a round even. They come straight back on
Hmm.
immediately afterwards. And I think increasingly I'm certainly for small count minis games. But generally, I'm less and less sure that having miniatures removed is a fun, interesting, useful thing in games. Uh,
Certainly, I think what we're both starting to suspect is it's such a given, like it's such a common design element that, you've got some miniatures, you put them down, they get shot at, and then you take them off again. That it's very rarely questioned. And the more we start to mess around with alternatives to it, the more we're finding that actually this really should be questioned. There's a lot of cool things that happen when you don't take models off, when you're forced to
yeah,
think of other things to do with them.
yeah. I think this is the thing. It's like fundamentally, the miniatures are interesting. What they can do, their capacity, the way they interact with the tabletop is like a large part of the interest engine of a game.
Mm.
So it seems sort of obvious that the fewer miniatures you have on the tabletop, the less interest there therefore is on the tabletop. Now, that's not always like entirely true. Um,
Well, it might not be. Like we've made a fairly common point of saying, well, the interest curve of a game, which I think we pulled out. I certainly pulled out of whatchamacallit. Uh, damn, I can't remember the textbook that I pulled it out of. But anyway, the like curve of interests about how much decision making and how interesting those decisions are. Like, I don't like towards the end of the game, you've got a few number of pieces that in the decisions around those reduced number of pieces become more like pinpoint interesting, like they're more meaningful. But to a degree, I'm starting to second guess whether that's just an excuse that I'm coming up with or an actual definite effect. Because even if you
well,
don't take models off, there still are going to be more places where there's going to be a few number of places where things matter.
yeah,
Probably.
well, it's tricky because I think with like a mass battle game, part of the visual and sort of the vibe of it is the cinematic of like serried ranks of troops all lined up on the tabletop.
Hmm.
And so you kind of like you don't have to, but you really want to have a situation where at the start you've got like tons and tons of miniatures on the table because that's just inherently satisfying for that sort of game.
Mm.
Um, but it's really hard to have focused like narrative beats when you have like broad battle lines. And it's also quite difficult to ask people to continue to spread their attention across that entire battle line. And it's why a lot of games like mass battle games basically chunk all those miniatures into like five or six actual active participants anyway. And those miniatures are often just sort of visualized wound counters for a
Mm.
unit rather than actual sort of individual active pieces. But I think like a lot of the time with mass battle games, you've got the same amount of interest at all points in the game in a way. It's just at the start that bucket is like it's a puddle. It's very very broad, but not exactly deep. And then sort of as models get taken out, that pool becomes deeper and deeper until you've got a few models left, and you have like quite a lot of focus on them. But
Mm.
like low miniatures count games, I think often have a situation where there's more depth on every model at the start of the game. You think it's something like Malifaux. At the start of the game, every miniature on Malifaux has like a list of stuff it can do. It's got multiple things it needs to interact with in multiple interesting ways. You know, it's got to mess around with scheme markers and get into certain positions and interact with other models and drop bubbles around and all this sort of stuff.
Mm.
And so the idea that like that a game like that definitely gets more interesting when some of those incredibly finely wrought, complex and interesting cogs gets pulled out, I think is a really hard like claim to justify. I think it's really difficult to be like, oh no, this gets way more interesting when I pull off this thing that interacts in like 9 different other ways with the rest of your crew. It's like,
Yeah, like maybe increasing the ability or the incident count of like your finely wrought clockwork getting interrupted or naffed up by other people. Like, sure, like it's not that sort of friction isn't interesting or like resistance to you being able to do the thing that you want to do isn't interesting, but um with each model that's removed in a skirmish game like that, you've just got fewer things to consider, fewer tools to apply, fewer options, fewer decisions.
and I think I don't believe that it's like not possible to offer that friction without the removal of miniatures. You know, it's like you know, like I say with space kits, you know, the friction is about the fact that you get knocked over and then having to get back up again requires a specific set of actions. And you can always basically get back up again, but it requires you to invest resources in achieving that. And is it worth
Mm.
investing that resource for that particular guy at this moment? You know, like
So, like, I know specifically why I put the down and not out mechanic into Space Gits because initially, it wasn't 100% like a, ooh, let me see if I can remove model removal. That was only part of the initial impulse. So the three things were, um, I was playing somebody else's game and, I was playing Gav Thorpe's game of dwarfs fighting dwarfs, and in his head, like dwarfs are tough as old boots. They don't kill each other. It's a sort of dwarf drunken brawl. So they just sort of knock each other unconscious, and there's no model removal. That was one element. Another is that I've been playing quite a lot of like shooters like Fortnite, where you've got a down and not out mechanic, and you have to pick people back off of the ground. You know, you get it in lots of sort of squad based shooter type situations. Um, and the two things coalesced into that thought that I'm always trying to figure out as I move from like the mechanics of fun to is the game overall fun, is like trying to figure out where the magnets are in the table, like from turn to turn, what's the magnetic poles that are pulling people towards the fun interaction between models, and the idea that the dice tower falls over, therefore your model falls over, was just sort of a linguistic twist that obviously like made sense as soon as I kind of came up with that connection with between the language and the physicality. And then the fact that the model was lying down, it created a new magnet, which was like, okay, there's like a new objective here temporarily, which is it's worth my time stopping doing what I was going to do, or stopping going and picking up this objective, or stopping and going and attacking this guy, because I could go and like write this guy up instead, and I don't have to. He'd still be there next turn if I don't. And so I like ended up creating this new set of like emergent sort of tactical questions and magnets, and that like realizing that that was the effect of having models not be removed but instead be prone. I don't know, like that just felt really good all of a sudden.
yeah, it's interesting because we played the Warlord Games ABC Warriors um, 2000 AD game
Mm.
a couple of weeks ago, and like that, I think that's particularly interesting because it's like that comes in multiple flavors, sort of that overall system. You've got Strontium Dogs and Judge Dredd, and it's like we played Strontium Dogs and people died fairly swiftly and certainly got sort of taken out fairly swiftly. But in the ABC Warriors version, because they're all like these hulking war droids, basically shooting them was a total waste of time. You were just
Mhm.
machine gunning each other in the face, and the other just didn't
Ping, ping,
care,
ping, ping.
peeing off. And we got to a point where we sort of stopped bothering with the shooting anymore. It's like the only effective combat mechanic was that my guy had knockback on one of his weapons, and there's no possibility I was ever going to hurt you, but it was very important to like hammer you off the objective so that
Mhm.
you weren't contesting it anymore. And that was sort of interesting in that that game managed to retain its interest whilst having like model removal being effectively impossible for like any of the character models we were playing with. But equally, it's like we only figured that out like part way through the game after like like just
Yeah,
absolutely
it
machine.
didn't like wear it on its sleeve. So
Mm,
another game that I've experimented with this, that I don't think Glenn, you and I actually haven't played this together, but Crud Bucket, which is
mm,
my sort of like sort of fantasy basketball. But obviously, like it's I took the Chess 28 rules and said, well, like, let's have a go at Blood Bowl and see what we can do. And one of the things about Blood Bowl is that it's got a very, inherited from the 80s sort of, you can kick people to death and then they die and they get removed, even though it's a sports game. And so one of the things that I dislike about Blood Bowl, and you can come at me in the comments if you like, but I'm not a huge fan of that game, is that like you can play against someone who plays very aggressively and they just concentrate on eliminating all of your models, and then you aren't playing Blood Bowl anymore.
mm.
You're just playing like a third of Blood Bowl or something. And in Crub Bucket, all that happens is that all combat is about shoving and interrupting. So it's either pushing back or stopping people from achieving what they were going to do. And there's no model removal in that. It's only a three or four player aside game. So again, like for me, there's a fine piece of clockwork where you need to be passing and moving and and getting a chain reaction of passing the ball so that you can shoot on the goal. And if you take one of those pieces away, like the clockwork of the game falls to pieces. And so I was like, well, let's just not have model removal. Let's just keep the clockwork ticking. And it's about how the pressure moves from one end to the other, not about whether you've kicked my teeth in.
Yeah, I mean, famously, like the first edition of Guild Ball essentially died because it had model removal and people were able to just sideline the ball and murder the other team, and it just became sort of a skirmish combat game. And I think it's like it's particularly interesting in relation to sports games that you still have a lot of sports game, skirmish miniature sports games that have murder in them, where
Mm.
it's like, well, obviously we have examples of sports games that are interesting and have friction and interaction and tactics and strategy and all these things with no massed slaughter of one side, because we have actual sports which have all of those things. And it's really weird that every time we
With the
go
exception of hockey, maybe.
but like every time someone decides to do sort of a sports skirmish game, they're like, okay, well, let's put in some fighting
Yeah,
mechanics.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, because we all grew up playing, that robot murder ball game and watching, rollerball, etc.
Yeah, but it is sort of it's weird that because it particularly in those it's like,
Particularly in sports, it's a strange assumption to import from wargaming. Yeah.
well, it's like particularly like in a sports game like that, there's a very obvious what should be magnet like focus for attention, which is the ball,
Hmm.
the scoring mechanic, and like killing the other person shouldn't really make any sense in relation to that, but like pushing the other person down, taking the ball off them, pushing them away, those things all make sense in relation to the ball. Straight up killing them is a bit like, this doesn't feel like it has any relationship to it, and it's exactly the problem that Guild Ball had, where it's like, well, this game is meant to be about the football, it's meant to be about this ball and the way you manipulate it, and they fell into this trap where the game was just not about the ball. It completely very competitive you know, at the top competitive level, the ball was a total side issue. Teams won without ever touching the damn thing.
Mm.
And so it's like I think that is a perfect example of like a game that should have reconsidered whether model removal was like a good or useful thing within their
Mm.
design. You know, because it caused them very serious problems, assuming that it was a necessity,
Mm.
you know, to come back on. And like I say, I think even straight up combat games, there are ways of like representing combat without necessitating model removal. And it's like, you know, there are lots of movie tropes that relate to this. It's like, you
Mm.
know, there are tons of like kung fu movies where people don't die and don't die regularly. It's like, you know, Jackie Chan movies are full of people being punched all over the place, and it's pretty rare that he, you know, straight up kills a dude in one of those
And
movies.
if you remove the model, how can they do that like final bad guy thing where it's like, oh, he's not dead and he's grabbed him?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think like keeping certain sort of models around it keeps like centers of interest in the game. It keeps ways of things coming back again and having those narrative beats, those narrative moments. Um, so I think like mechanically, then how do you like, you know, achieve those ebbs and flow within the game and still have, like I say, because you still want grit, you still want friction,
Mm.
you still want people to be punished for things going badly for them.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think the fun thing is that the three examples that we've got most recently that we've worked on, I guess, provide three kind of classes of this. So Crud Bucket has the sort of softest approach, which is there is no model removal and there is also no way of like doing damage. All it is, it's about movement. It's about pushing. It's about changing the way that the other models can move. And in the case of Crud Bucket, like there's an aura of debuff so that, you know, if you want to attempt a pass, then it you know it's annoying having someone standing next to you, so you want to push them away. So
hmm,
pushing and moving people around instead of killing them. um the down and not out mechanic from Space Kits is kind of the next softest, where okay, we're just not going to remove models, we're just going to knock them prone. But critically, we're going to provide like ways of getting them back up again. It's ages since I played Necromunda last. Like Necromunda had a lot of prone models, but I don't think you could stand them up again. Maybe you could.
hmm. I don't know. I think I seem to remember that you can, but yeah. But anyway, it's
Yeah, we'll have to go back to the archives to figure that one out. Um, and Borders and Black Flags has the sort of hardest or the nearest to model removal, which is just let us bring them back. Yes, we'll have killing and we'll let people take models off, but it won't matter that long. It won't matter for long, and we'll just let people bring models back on. And that can work, you know, in your games about, you know, people, there's a ship full of borders, and so you can refresh the things, and that can work, you know, with drop pods or summoning, you know, necromancers and whatnot. And
yeah.
that way, I think, what's important in um, Borders and Black Flags is that in that case, you reset the model,
Hmm,
the position of the model in an interesting way, where they did have a presence here in quadrant, you know, XY, and now
hmm.
they've been removed, and so they're going to have to walk on, and maybe they'll get back to that same spot. Maybe that spot is now inaccessible to them. Maybe they can now apply pressure somewhere else,
Yeah, exactly. And that,
like returning a queen to the table.
yeah, exactly. And I think that is the thing where each of those different ways of dealing with, you know, the friction of the game without model removal has their own like additional advantages. Like I say, pushing, I think, is, you know, because these are games about movement and positioning and location. And
Hmm.
so making attacks about pushing miniatures around and knocking them out of position and shifting them back and forth is a great way of like changing the pressure points and the areas of danger and the areas of relationship on the table. And I think just inherently like your attack pushes the other guy around is a lot of the time much more sort of interesting in relation to the relationships that creates than your attack just takes the guy off the table. I think like being knocked down is, you know, interesting because the downed model then becomes a new, like you say, sort of magnet of interest on the tabletop. How do they get back up again? Do they get back up again, with another miniature? Do they need to like invest resources into standing themselves up? Do you have to spend an activation when you've got alternating activation to like stand the guy up and that's what he does? And
Mm.
so when is it worth standing him up? What auras does he have? What things does he affect? That downed miniature now becomes a different subset of concerns and interests and interactions on the tabletop. And yeah, like you say, with like a system that has reinforcements, and I think particularly one that has reinforcements with like sort of interesting deployment zones. The removal of a miniature and the instant returnal of it to one of those interesting deployment zones. So, like in boards and black flags, if you are the host, the guy who's receiving the borders, you can put your guys back on the table next to one of the like the powder store or the cargo store or the captain's cabin, which
Hmm.
are the things the other guy is trying to search in order to score his VP. So at that point, the fact that you can then return somebody back on so that they have an aura of stopping people searching around the sort of VP magnets of the game actually means that sometimes you want your guy to die. So, if he's far enough out of position, so you can then pop him down so that he can start like, affecting the search capabilities of other miniatures. So there again,
Mm.
it makes the removal and return in like a way of changing the pressures on the table. You can sort of threaten a new section, or you could pressure a new model. Uh,
Mm.
and yeah,
That's fun actually. I hadn't really thought of it this way, but Mystic Skies does something quite similar in that uh, to deploy a new unit, like a new minion, it just costs you like it costs you like one of your wizard six activations. It's sort of just a thing that you can do, but you can then deploy them either next to your tower, which is back at home and what you're trying to attack of mine, or within a bubble around the wizard, and the wizard could be anywhere. So like it creates an interesting question of like, well, is my wizard where I need to be, or do I need to bring him out of whatever he was doing to deploy a defense guy over here or in the middle of the table or whatever?
yeah, and I think like tracking back to some older things where you can maybe see some of these ideas forming. A Billion Suns absolutely has model removal,
Mm,
but it has infinite model introduction. So it's like you can essentially have the model taken off and then put it straight back onto the tabletop if
yeah.
you're willing to pay the jump in resources and the monetary resources to do it. And again, you have these multiple jump points on multiple tables. So it being removed and then returned, especially because like utility vehicles are a top limit for number on the table rather than in a scenario overall. So at that point, like the fact that utility vehicles are a bit slow and weak and you're only allowed a certain number of them on the table, one of them gets removed, and suddenly that means you can reintroduce it onto a completely different table, a completely different sort of zone of interaction becomes
Mm.
like, okay, it's not non-model removal, but it has those elements in there certainly. So yeah, I think like
Yeah, I
as
guess that's where it sort of crosses over into like, are we talking about permanent force erosion or are and I think that like the places where you aren't removing models and you're just leaving them in place, like there's loads more to explore there. I'm really interested to find out like narratively, cinematically, like why isn't the model taken off? Like what happens when they're killed? What does that mean for like wounds and hit points? And can we like put different narrative spins on those things? Like, yeah. And also because like yeah, when we draw on things like, superhero movies and action movies, like, there's a class of people that definitely should get murdered in their hordes, and there's a class of people that are like functionally narratively immortal. And so maybe they should have two different systems, and maybe model removal makes sense for mooks and it doesn't make sense for heroes or something. And it's totally fine that there'd be two different systems there.
yeah, I always found it sort of slightly odd in the Osprey Gods and Monsters game that you can straight up stab a god to death. And I know it's like because they're Greek gods, and Greek gods fairly regularly got like offed when at least when they like came to Earth in their temporary form. But it still is a bit like, no, you definitely should not be able to murder a god with a hammer. That is
Mm.
not like, not normal. And I think it's like also, I think there's more and more interest in like non-combat games at the moment, and it's really interesting how hard it is the first time you start thinking about creating effective tension and areas of interest and back and forth in a game that literally has no combat. But
Mm.
I really do think it's a very interesting thing to engage with as a sort of just a design challenge, and I think it makes for really cool, interesting games. I think, in short, like as is so often with the things we talk about, it's about sort of not assuming that removal is a necessity in these sorts of games. I'm not saying don't have removal in your games. Like the next game that I'm working on definitely does have removal. The one I'm thinking of working on after it doesn't. It's like it has a place and it has like uses, and depending on the story you want to tell, it's totally reasonable to have it in many, many games. But I don't think it needs to be in the like 90% of miniatures games that it tends to turn up in. And very often I look at games, I just go like, this would just be more interesting if you didn't have killing in it. And I don't really know what killing is achieving here apart from reducing the fun level in a game for somebody. It's like, particularly
Mm.
if it's an objective driven game, it's like, why are you killing my stuff? It's just stopping me from interacting with the game. It's not really, it's like a secondary route to winning for you, but it's such a petty and mean.
Well, I think that yeah, that's a fun element, which is that so many games now have evolved from just kill everything to kill everything but pretend we're going after the objectives for a hot second before we murder everything. And in those games, you're absolutely right. Like there's definitely a question where is an objective playing game just always more about the killing because it reduces your ability to both interact with the objectives and stop me from interacting with the objectives. So it's always my primary concern is to reduce your capability, and then I'll see if I can clean up the objectives. Which we've mentioned it before, but like that's another reason why scoring at the end of each turn rather than scoring at the end of the game is so important to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I think like take a look at whatever game, if you're working on a game that has miniature removal, has model removal, has like the removal of interesting participants in the game, take a look at it and just consider whether like knocking them back, knocking them down, having them go away temporarily and then come back in as a replacement reinforcement changes the texture of the game, ups the interest of the game. Is it a good thing that people get tabled in your game? Does it make it more fun, or does it sort of reduce the tactical interest and potentially reduce the enjoyment, and also make timing the length of your game really weird and out of whack? Because it's like one of the things about like not having miniatures removal is that you never have a game that ends on turn one because someone's been tabled, and so you can say, this will last for 4 turns. I can guarantee it because I know everybody's going to be there after 4 turns.
Yeah,
um
I mean, it genuinely introduces the other problem, which is that like you better put a way for the game to end because
yes,
there
yes,
isn't like a natural erosion point. That
yes,
certainly was something that I struggled with a bit on Space Kids.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Finding non-arbitrary game ending mechanics for games without model removal is its own interesting
Mm.
odd little thing. And if you're fool enough to make a game without model removal and without a round count either, then you very much entered into no man's land territory.
Yeah.
But I think with that, we'll round off this conversation. If you've played a game that had more model removal in it and you've sort of thought, I don't know why this has this mechanic, I don't use it or it doesn't make the game more fun, swing down and sort of mention in the comment section. I know there are people out there who are like, this idea is literally verboten. It's like, no, they all have to have model removal. You're in full for suggesting they shouldn't. Please do swing down to the comment section and put your point of view and say why you think this and why it makes all games better. While you're doing down there commenting and shouting at me for being a fool, hit on the like and subscribe buttons. Check out the links section where when this video goes up, my Kickstarter for Boards and Black Flags will still be live, and I'd really appreciate if you swung by, backed it, or just
swung off the yardarm and
yeah,
backed it quickly before it sinks.
yeah, back it in its remaining like last week or two.
Awesome
Share it
stuff.
around, help me out. Swing by to the Discord and have chats with us about miniature removal in miniatures games. Check out the links to the various places where you can buy our gear and play our games. But for now, I think from this episode, from this Rule of Carnage, it'll be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.